Hey, my name is Alexei, more known as AloneFlaver. I'm a Ukrainian artist that has been creating tips for the Clip Studio Paint community for years, and I'm back with another guide after an almost 2 year long break. This time, I welcome you with a Tips of the Month contest article on the Art with Photos topic. Please enjoy this guide in either its video version that you are currently watching or its text version, the link to which you will find in the description. And make sure to turn the subtitles on for your own convenience. So, today we are creating an artwork with a photo I made myself. At first, I wasn't sure which one to choose, but then I scrolled down to this image I made in the summer of 2023. This is a governmental building in the center of my city, Mykolaiv, Ukraine. It was destroyed due to a missile attack a year prior. A horrible night with many souls lost. I'm sorry this is such a moody pic. I understand that my decision might influence my chances in the contest in a very negative way, but I just felt that this is the photo I really want to choose and spread, something I really wanted to work on. And so I turned this photo into this art. It was somewhat painful to work on, with many thoughts constantly rushing through my mind, but I finished it. And today you will learn how you yourselves can create something similar. I was aiming for a somewhat anime-like style of backgrounds. By the way, my very first tips guide also included some photo using and matte painting techniques. They were not used during the current process, but you might find them useful in combination with the ones we're going to study today. The link to that guide will also be in the description. And today we're using the photo itself as a basement, and we'll apply necessary details and changes to turn it from something real into something artistic. So, let's begin. Nota bene, I will be using the X version of Clip Studio Paint as it has one specific feature that will assist us greatly in the process. The guide is still valid for all users though. Initial effects. An important note, I'm not going to move, alter or remove any big or significant elements of the photo. There will be noticeable changes, but the main geometry and composition will be the same. So please, if you need to move, cut or distort something in your photo, do this prior to this stage. Thank you. I was pursuing the idea of an anime-like background, so I immediately started with actions that would give the photo the look I aimed for. Now let's learn how to do this in practice. Import the photo you have into Clip Studio Paint. Make 3 copies of your initial layer with the photo, so you would have 4 layers in total. Hide the lowest one. The hidden layer is a backup in case you want to start something over, or if you made a mistake only the original image could resolve. Now hide the top 2 visible layers, so only the third one remains visible. We need this done to see the effect we are to apply to the layer. Open the Edit tab and find the Smart Smoothing feature. The feature itself is meant to smooth the artifacts and imperfections in upscaled low-res images. But I discovered that if used right, it can provide a distinct painting-ish effect, similar to artistic filters. So I've been using it in some of my works ever since. In the period window, you will need to mark the Remove Noise option. It will process additional cleaning of your image from noise and the smallest details, and set the strength of the effect to strong. With such preferences, the image's textures and elements will go farther from real and look more like a painting. Check out this before and after comparison. Line art done in a minute. Now you can unhide the second layer, the one that's right above the one we've just smoothed. As I mentioned in the beginning of the guide, we're using the X version of Clip Studio Paint. And now we are going to use its unique feature. Even if you're using a default layout of the interface, you will find it above the layer list, in the Layer Property window. Click on the Extract Line icon while the recently unhidden layer is chosen. This feature analyzes the layer and turns it into a monochrome image with all contour lines extracted. To put it simply, it turns any image and even object layer into their line art versions. But it's very unlikely that you will receive a perfect result right away. Once you've activated the feature, new sliders and buttons will appear under it. Go back to them and set the accuracy to the highest preset. Next, you should play with the black fill, line width, and edge threshold sliders. Their parameters really depend on your photo, its resolution, contrast, brightness, amount of complex and small elements, etc. For images like mine with the resolution of 2268 by 4032, you can put the black fill to 20, line width to 0, and edge threshold to 100, or similar ones. These numbers felt optimal for my needs in this particular work. The black fill slider regulates the amount and scale of zones filled with black. The zones that were shadowy in the original photo will go black first. The line width controls how thick all the lines will be, and the edge threshold slider basically regulates how clean your image will be from the smallest lines and textures. Extract line feature also has several other toggles, but they are not relevant for us in this type of work. And now that our layer looks much cleaner now and even somewhat resembles a manga page, let me answer your question, what are we even doing this for? Since we're aiming for a style similar to anime backgrounds, I determined several key factors that would emphasize the necessary feeling from the piece. Smart smoothing helped us achieve one of them, and these lines will create an effect of an artwork that was created more traditionally, with line art that was then colored in. Additionally, these lines will move us even farther from the realistic look of the image. To see the effect I'm talking about, set the layer preference to multiply to remove the white solid. We used the original photo for line extraction and not the smoothed one to receive the most accurate lines possible. The lines from the smoothed photo wouldn't be precise enough to keep the aimed effect. However, if the resulted lines still appear too harsh and strict to your eye, or if there are too many black dots left across the canvas, you can additionally use smart smoothing on the line layer with intensity set to weak, which I did for this one. Atmospheric haziness. And now to the third one of the basic effects we are applying. Anyone would find the current look of the image too messy and contrast, so we need to compensate that. If you ever paid attention to backgrounds in anime, most of them have this light haziness, which is especially noticeable in edges between contrast objects like buildings and sky. This tiny detail is crucial as it unites all of the objects in the frame under one compositional atmospheric accent. It helps the creator to show the interconnection of everything and presence of all elements in one world. To add this atmospheric haziness, unhide the top layer and switch its layer preference to screen. This will let the two other layers we've just completed be visible through the top one and will compensate the levels of the image. Next, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. The intensity of blur you need to set now depends on your canvas's resolution. Mine once again was 2268 by 4032, and the intensity of 12 was just fine for me. And now we have this result with a direct comparison on an example of the leaves. Manual edit. And with this, basic preparations are complete. We're now ready to proceed to manual work with the image. Manual work is different in each separate case. Sometimes you should do things you did not in the previous project and vice versa. You should not be afraid if something is missing in your photo that is present in mine. Feel free to edit those things in a way similar to how I edit those present in mine. The grass near the building was still giving away this real photo vibe, so I needed to alter it. No complicated techniques or an in-depth knowledge of Clip Studio Paint are required. Disable the two correction layers, the screen and multiply ones, and create a new layer above the one that's left visible. In this new layer, you need to paint over a new grass. Just pick any grass brush you have in your possession, be it a default one, a brush you found in Clip Studio Assets, or the one you made yourself. My preference is usually this little guy. It is a simple tile of grass blades that give a pleasant effect. Now all you need to do is to constantly pick shades from the original grass and draw the new one in the new empty layer. You don't need to constantly switch layers in order to get a new shade of grass. Just make sure your eyedropper is set to obtain display color preference, and so it will grab any shade on the canvas even if you're currently on an empty layer. For convenience, I also keep the eyedropper on one of my pen's buttons. So I simply hold the button on my pen to have eyedropper, then choose a shade on the canvas, and then release the button so my tool automatically returns to the previous selected brush, which is the grass brush in our case. Keep spreading the new grass until it more or less covers all of the original grass. When you feel like you've added enough, you can also use Smart Smoothing on the new grass so it looks more in line with the rest of the image. But it depends on the gloss brush you've chosen. If you proceed with the one I used, I recommend using Smart Smoothen with strong intensity, as the texture of this brush is rather rough and has many small strokes in its core. When there are lots of them in one place, they may appear way too sharp if not smoothed. That will be the base for our gloss. We will apply some additional changes to it later, but it can be left as is for now. Textures reworked. Next, we need to take a look at the textures of the objects in the frame. Remember, we need to move from realism and reach semi-realistic effect that would let us use the final art in animation or as a cover, for example. The way the textures in your photos are presented can give away a lot of unneeded things. Unhide all the layers we've edited and set the eyedropper to pick up color from layer, so it would only grab shades from the layer you are currently on. Choose the normal layer with the photo that we smoothed in the beginning. You should take a thorough look at the whole image and see where the textures still look too realistic. Pick a textured brush that you like the most, preferably the one that can imitate oil brush strokes but complex enough to see the brush imperfections and texture. These are the ones I chose. As you can see, they are a bit unusual and don't quite look like an oil painting brush, but they still work for my needs. The point is to paint over the existing image where necessary. You can literally go wild here and choose the brush you like. Draw with big and small strokes alike. Don't be afraid, just pick a shade from the place you're about to paint over and do your thing. Your goal is to add a slight imitation of actual painting to the image. Your target is textures that seem overly realistic. While you're doing this, you can also emphasize contact shadows between objects. Anime style tends to be more dramatic and contrast, so don't hesitate adding these aspects to your work. You can even choose shades different from those present in the canvas, and take colors for shadows that are darker than the actual shadow from the photo. And make sure to emphasize the contrast within and between the objects. These are the main tips for this stage. I didn't apply big strokes as the composition features way too many smallest details like wires, debris, cracks, stone blocks, etc. So I mostly concentrated on each object's texture and their contact shadows. A couple more hints on this stage. 1. If there is a long object like pillars, walls, etc., add a chiaroscuro gradient to it. To put it simply, add a gradient with shadow that very smoothly goes into lighter shade. It will add volume to the object. 2. Leaves customization is up to you. I did not change the trees in any way here. Their base will remain the same up until the very end. You can always use texture brushes like with the grass in the previous stage, but it is up to you. geometry shadows. Now we're finally at the stages that are perhaps the most striking in terms of visual changes. The stages that are key to anime background vibes, stylization, and overall composition mood creation: shadow and light. We are starting with the former. This stage is relatively simple. The most difficult about it is perhaps deciding the light source or the light sources, position and angle. Once done, you create a new layer with multiply preference and place it above all else. Now you have two options. The first one is to choose a relatively bright shade for your shadows. The closer is the shade you choose to pure white, the less visible it is in a multiply layer, while pure black would simply act as a normal paint and would overlap your image. It won't do, though you need something in between. The other option is to lower your layer's opacity and proceed with any shade you want, from pure black to something really close to white, since pure white still won't work and won't be visible at all at a multiply layer. I prefer this option as it gives me a possibility to easily regulate the shadow's intensity if needed, and leaves a bigger chunk of the color palette to my usage. So I was using a deep dark and desaturated blue shade with a layer of 60% opacity. Now your friends are the regular soft airbrush and the polyline selection instrument. If you want to add a giant shadow that covers most of your composition, just increase the size of the brush and add it. And if you need to cover smaller separate elements in the same shadow, you can either increase the hardness of the airbrush and its parameters, or choose a sharper brush. But sometimes the geometry of the elements in your composition might overlap itself or other elements. In such cases, use the selection. I prefer the mentioned polyline selection, but honestly feel free to use any of the available ones. Just make sure to properly outline the geometry and then add shadows within the selected area so they feel natural in the frame. Now start spreading shadow across the place until you're satisfied. I want to specify one thing. In the next step, I'm going to apply something that will improve the feeling of depth and volume of the composition a bit. However, I strongly recommend to consider cutting out the sky into a separate layer before proceeding. I am not going to do this for this image, as the leaves in the foreground are too complex for manual work here, and selecting every single pixel of sky between them is not proficient. So I'm going to bypass this with a trick. But if your image actually has a countable sky, please do this for your own convenience. Don't hide it, just leave it be on a separate layer. And now let's create one more multiply layer on top, put it to about 30% of opacity, and fill in with a gradient. The gradient should consist of the same dark blue shade in the bottom and gradually go into transparency on the way up. To find the necessary gradient, go to the Gradient tab and choose the Foreground to Transparent variant. Now you simply need to change your main color for the gradient to change as well. Add this gradient to the whole image, no exceptions. Now, if you cut the sky out into a separate layer, simply place the gradient below it. But if you, just like in my case, have too many elements that didn't let you cut the sky, you will need to clean up the sky's zone with eraser or transparent brush manually. Light source and effects. And now it's time to proceed with light. Since we're looking at a light passing through the hole in the building, I decided that making it a sunset composition would be a right choice. And if you make sunset a key light source of your composition, it normally should be a really bright and vibrant part of the image. Looking at sunset or any strong light makes you see darker objects less clear, and makes camera lenses change their exposure so the light doesn't fill out the whole frame. So camera makes the scene much darker to keep everything more or less visible. My example here shows this in practice. I made two photos. In one, I focused the camera on the sun in the finished version of my artwork, and in the other, I focused it on the darker part of the frame, the monitor's leg that was not lit. The effect on the right is what I was aiming for while creating the piece. Create a new layer in the top of your list and give it Add Glow preference. Next, you need to pick a bright shade similar to the one of your sky. Mine was of a convenient bright color close to white, so white is the color I chose. If your sky is of a blue or orange or any other shade, you should stick to its palette. Remember that in this composition, when we are facing the sun and the rest of the sky is mostly closed by objects and vegetation, you don't really need much details like clouds. You may even change your sky's color to white like mine, as with the exposure focused on darker elements, the camera tries to amplify the information it receives and, thus, improve the details seen in the darker areas, which results in brighter areas like sky being lighted up to a state they might just turn blinding white. Now go around your sky area and start filling it with a soft airbrush. Specifically, go slightly beyond the borders of the objects it touches to imitate the leak of light. This will tie the objects together with additional atmospheric volume. Also, leave some dotted light spots among the leaves to emphasize the light rays that go through the empty parts between them. Now that the base for our light is here, let's glow it up. Literally. Create a new color dodge layer and choose a shade that will represent your light source's main color. I chose an orange one. Now start spreading giant light gradients with the same airbrush across the same area where your sky is visible. But this time, let them go deep into the objects surrounding the area. Make the brush large enough to cover the area with just several strokes. Use light touches, don't make the light too intense. It should be a nice and light gradient from the center of the sky and a bit into the elements it is surrounding. Now create another color dodge layer and repeat the process, but scale the brush up even more and let the light cover the surrounding objects even farther. But this time put the layer's opacity to lower values, like I set mine to 21%. This is a supporting layer that emphasizes the light we already have and improves its connection with all other elements. Back to shadow. Now we need to adjust the contrast of the shadows to the strength of the light. Create a new multiply layer and put it below the 3 light-related layers we have. Choose the same dark blue, or your accordion shade, that we used in the previous shadows. Put the layer's opacity to 50% and with big enough airbrush, start covering the areas in soft yet vast shadows according to their geometry. The most important thing now is to emphasize the areas that logically should be the darkest, and to also improve the contrast with the light source. You can use more than one new multiply layer here, as I also created another one with the same parameters and used it on the zones that are the farthest or the most hidden from the sun. Don't forget about the trees this time. Add slight touches of shadows to their clusters of leaves. This will amplify the effect of artistic work and move the impression from it closer to anime-like examples. The part of the grass closer to the building was also covered in shadow by me, as this is the angle where the shadow should be cast. But light is still there, within us. But then there's this tragic hole. It reminded me that not all of the grass should be covered in shadow, as not all of the building's parts are present. So I removed the shadow from the corner opposite to the light source. And then I created a layer with overlay preference, and with the same orange shade I added soft strokes between the light and dark areas of the grass. An effect known as chromatic fringe, the saturated colorful line on the edge between light and shadow. It is really subtle, as the layer's opacity should be set to lower numbers, but it has its effect. It is completely optional though, and is more of a stylistic choice. Now back to sun. We need one more thing to complete its score. Create another add glow layer and pick a big airbrush of approximately the same radius as the radius of the current light around your sun, and make a stroke that starts at the center of your sun's position and goes towards the ground at an angle you want to set. I chose something close to 45 degrees. Use a color closer to red or orange if you are proceeding with a gamut similar to mine. Now decrease the size of the brush by about 30 to 50% and pick a shade closer to yellow. Then repeat the stroke at the same position and angle, but with a smaller brush and changed color. Also make it slightly shorter. Once done, decrease the size even more and make the color brighter, about halfway to white. And add another stroke that is also a bit shorter. And finally, decrease the brush once again and take the pure white color. Add the final white small stroke and the sun score. This will create a volumetric gray and the sun itself. We needed to start at red shades and the bigger scale and go to brighter yellow and white colors, as this is how the color decrease works in real life. The farther from the light source, the more the shade of the light will move around the palette until it dissolves. A nice color theory tip you should note. In the same way, you can add small rays beaming through the leaves, but it's optional and I don't recommend making them too visible. The new grass. Looking at the whole piece, I noticed that it still feels a bit flat. So in order to improve this aspect, I turned to a quite simple but effective technique. I added a layered grass to the corner opposite the light source. That's a popular compositional technique and is one easy to use. For preparations, I created a color dodge layer and, yes, with the same airbrush, covered the grass that is in the sun with light. This is not the technique I mentioned, but this action alone already makes all look richer and makes the lightened grass look more in match with the rest of the composition. Next, create a new normal layer and place it below the color dodge one we've just worked with. The layered grass technique is honestly very simple. All you need is to choose a textured grass brush, one, two, or several, doesn't matter, and start adding layers of grass one onto the other. Start with the brighter shade. Make sure to choose the colors that match the gamut of the artwork. Remember that we are creating a foreground of the grass, so the texture should be set brighter than the grass you already have from the photo, if you have it at all. When you've added the first portion of the bright grass, choose a darker shade that is close enough to the previous color, and make the texture of the brush a bit bigger. Repeat the process. Then again, and again, constantly making the texture bigger and the color darker. 4 to 5 layers should suffice. The layer of the grass that is closest to the camera should be the darkest and contain the biggest grass texture. Last touches. The work is almost done. We only need to print a bit more details to finish the stylization. Since I was considering lenses and exposure before, I also decided to add the slightest bokeh effect around the light areas. I used a bokeh far brush from this set. All I did was put some big bokeh particles on a separate add glow layer. I used white as the main color for them, but you can also pick the same shade you used for the light and rays. Then I created another add glow layer and picked the default running color spray brush with particles. You can find it in the airbrush set of brushes. I went around the spots of the light leakages and added the particles. All of this is pure artistic choice, no lenses imitation or something like that. Speaking of them physically, they could be dust particles or flying bugs. But honestly, all I myself can feel in them is souls. But anyway, even speaking compositionally, they add volume and depth to the space of your work. So consider adding them or other small chaotic elements like fallen leaves or raindrops. It is better to change the particle size a couple of times while adding them for a more natural feeling of presence of this element in the frame, to emphasize the difference in their size and the distance from the camera. Optional stage: noise implementation. Adding noise is not a must. It is essential in some specific cases, like when you're trying to reach a very concrete effect or style, but unless that's your goal from the beginning, it is up to you whether or not adding it. I prefer my works with a slight noise, so I edit it. Usually I use a set of pre-made images containing noise texture. I have both monochrome and color variants. But upon applying them, I didn't like the look they brought in this case. So I went and created another version of noise with Clip Studio Paint's built-in instrument. And I will teach you how to create any kind of noise you might need. Create a new layer above all the other ones. Then go to Filter, Render, Perlin Noise. The layer will be filled with a noise pattern, but we need to adjust it. With the window appeared in front of you, you can create all kind of noises. I won't inspect all possible variants of usage and will only concentrate on what is needed currently. But you are free to play with the sliders as you please to reach the effect necessary for your unique cases. The initial pattern won't represent a camera noise. We need to adjust it. The first three sliders, scale, amplitude, and attenuation, will suffice for now. The first one regulates the size of the noise clusters. For a resolution close to mine, 2268 by 4032, I recommend setting this parameter to 2.0. Depending on your resolution, you may choose numbers from 1.0 to 3.0. This is my recommended scale. The amplitude and attenuation are more about the range of shades represented in the noise and contrast between them. This is a more subjective part, but I like the looks the noise gets with amplitude at 2.0 and attenuation at 0.03, a set of parameters for a contrast noise. After that, simply switch the layer's preference to overlay and lower their opacity. The opacity level I set for noise layers varies from 10 to 25 depending on how it behaves in each artwork. For this one, I stopped at 15. You can go back and recreate the noise pattern as many times as you like. You can even make it colorful if you apply a rainbow or color gradient map to it. Edit, tonal correction, gradient map. But I did not do this time, so only a verbal advice for now. After that, take a rest for about an hour. Let your eyes relax and forget the canvas, so you can return to it and criticize with a fresh gaze. Take a look at the whole piece and make sure to bring final corrections. Clean some messy strokes, adjust some correction layers, etc. Clean it up, so to say. And with this, the artwork is done. It was a complicated experience working with this photo, but I tried to make this guide as light in terms of mood as possible. Yes, this picture, its soul, its core, is what my family has to deal with every day here, and we're not in the worst position possible as of now. But you know, when I showed this work to my father, who is currently protecting us all at the front line, he said that what he sees in this work is hope. His words really fell into my heart, and I felt that too, thanks to him. So, to honor my father, I call this artwork The Hope. Please, be safe, be creative, and remain people. I hope my artwork and my guide will inspire you to create something beautiful and peaceful. Thank you for your time, and I wish you great inspiration.